Coming to the end of that small shaft is what they call a grand gallery. The grand gallery is considered to be an architectural masterpiece. Consists of corbelled layers, 7 corbelled layers, where the gallery actually gets smaller towards the top. Also, along the side of the grand gallery, we have ramps, and into the ramps are cut these notches. These notches are cut vertically into the ramps. There are 27 pairs of these notches, and as you go along the length of the gallery, you come to what is being called the Great Step. Climbing up the step, you have a horizontal passage, and then through the horizontal passage, a small antechamber, then again another small passage into the King's Chamber. The King's Chamber complex is the heart of the power plant. It is constructed solely of granite. It is tuned to a high degree to resonate at 440. It also emits naturally an F-sharp chord, and this was detected by an acoustic engineer named Tom Danley in 1995. The chamber is freestanding within the heart of the pyramid. It is not connected to the core blocks and is free to resonate and vibrate at will. Overlying the King's Chamber, we have 5 layers of granite beams. These granite beams, I speculated in my book, are actually resonating beams. They are unusually cut. They're cut square and flat on 3 sides, but the top side is very rough. The roughness on the top side, I believe, was done in order to tune the beams. Just like you would tune a bell, you would actually remove material until you achieve the tone that you wanted. The whole complex is like a musical instrument, and each feature lends resonance to the other feature. In the King's Chamber, we have a box. I call a box, conventionally it's called a sarcophagus. However, there have been no mummies, original burials found in any pyramid, and there was nothing found in the Great Pyramid, even when Al-Mamun entered in 812 AD. So the question is, what were these for? Also in the chamber are 2 shafts that lead to the outside of the pyramid on angles. These shafts, in the northern shaft, they have a 4.8 by 8.4 dimension. That is suitable for a waveguide in the microwave region, a hydrogen waveguide. In the
but they are.
Okay.
So what does archaeology do about that?
Sweep it under the
Sweep
rug.
it under the rug. But they can't. They can't. And so one of the things I'm looking for this morning is we have graphics to put up. And so if I can have the guys in the tech room bring up figure 2, which show just a quick picture of the pyramids right there. Now, you mentioned the Great Pyramid, and help me because we have people listening to the program this morning that don't have television.
Right.
So we have to watch that.
Right.
And so I want to be very descriptive in what we're talking about. That what the picture we're looking at is all of the pyramids, and of course the Great Pyramid is the big one. That's Khufu. That's about 500 feet high.
Wow.
That is the only remaining artifact out of the original 7 wonders of the world, because it's 500 feet of basically granite and stone. So it's remaining. And so let me have the guys bring up figure 3, which is another picture. When we talk about the pyramids, people tend to think that pyramids are basically in Egypt, and that's not true. There's pyramids all over the world. And the picture that we have up now is the Great White Pyramid in China, which is well over 1,000 feet high. And the graphic that's showing there, the pyramid to the left is the Great Pyramid of Khufu, which is just 500 feet. And then there's the Empire State Building to kind of give you a general idea of what we're talking about. And of course, the Great Pyramid in China, which is basically the same as the one in Egypt, is well over 1,000 feet high. So when you say pyramids, we're not just talking about Egypt, North Africa. Okay. We're talking about a worldwide design that was used thousands of years ago for a reason.
Okay.
For a reason.
For a reason.
And that reason is, at least from the Egyptian perspective, is that pyramids, and particularly Khufu, were built as a burial chamber for the pharaohs. That is incorrect. That the Egyptologist, Dr. Mark Lanier, has stated that they have never found a pharaoh in any pyramid. There's 80 pyramids in Egypt. They've never found a pharaoh in any pyramid. They find him in the Valley of the Kings.
Mm-hmm.
So that being the case, then what did they build a pyramid for?
Right.
See? And that brings up, if I can have the guys bring up figure 4. This will be very, very interesting. The Great Pyramid of Khufu is the only pyramid that they have been inside, and that's courtesy of, they feel, was a tomb robber back in 800 A.D., bored in the side of the pyramid, and they accidentally bored into one of the chambers, which opened up the entire inside the pyramid. In fact, Steve Johnson has been inside the pyramid.
Right.
And the graphic that we have on the screen now, let me describe this to the listeners that don't have the advantage of a graphic, is you have a pyramid, but what you have is various channels and passages inside the pyramid, but there is one large passageway that goes up at a 45-degree angle. That's the one you can see on the right there, and that's called the grand staircase. And then it comes up, and then it levels off horizontally and goes into what's called the king's chamber. And people will say, well, that's where they buried the king. Well, not really. Not really. But the interesting part to this is you will notice when you look at the graphic, Perry, that you have this column in the middle of the pyramid, which is called the king's chamber, and then you have a device that's on top of that. But if you go underneath the king's chamber, you'll see another little chamber down below. And that's called the queen's chamber. And people would say, well, that's where they buried the king and that's where they buried the queen.
Right.
But they didn't. They find them in the Valley of the Kings. What's
In
fascinating...
fact, there's no bones in there, right?
There's nothing at all.
Yeah.
No. It's as clean as a whistle, so to speak. But when they buried the pharaohs, they would bury them with all of their artifacts so they could take it with them to the afterlife. So they would find beds and, well, you've seen all the stuff that came out of King Tut's tomb.
Right.
But inside this pyramid is totally clean. The fascinating part about this, Perry, is I mentioned you can believe it or you cannot believe it. One of the ways that you judge the technology of a civilization is to compare it to your civilization. So I would say that the American civilization is probably the most advanced civilization on the planet today, correct?
I would say
Would you
so.
agree with that? I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. However, with all of the technological advancements that we've made, we have no idea how the Egyptians did what they did or what they did. And when I say that, a classic example is, and I was talking to Steve this morning, there's 2.3 million blocks in the pyramid of granite. They estimate that using today's technology, it would have taken the Egyptians, it would have taken us today 27 years to cut and quarry the stone and move them to the site to build a pyramid like that today. It took the Egyptians somewhere between 10 to 20 years to do it. The blocks are cut to 10,000ths of an inch. It's 2.3 million blocks. Today, our quarries maintain a tolerance of 1/4 of an inch. They were doing 10,000ths of an inch. Are you with me so far?
Yeah, the whole thing is so fascinating.
It's fascinating, but the bottom line is people will ask me, how did they do it? And I say, I can tell you how they did it. They did it because it was easy for them to do. Now, don't ask me specifically how they did it, but they did it because of 2.3 million blocks to 10,000ths of an inch. That's not something that an Egyptian with a copper chisel and a hammer is out there banging on a granite block to do that.
They did it because they could.
They did it because they could. Here's another one. The piece of granite that's called a sarcophagus, what people would assume that they would bury the pharaoh in, sits in the middle of the king's chamber. It weighs 70 tons. It's made out of pink granite. If a quarryman was to make it today, they would make 5 slabs. You would take the bottom slab, which would be the bottom, and you would take the other 4 and make the perimeter and bolt it all together. That would be a box. Mm-hmm. How did the Egyptians do it? They took a solid piece of granite, 70 tons, and hewn out the inside perfectly straight and perfectly flat. When Christopher Dunn was over in Egypt, he took a machinist square and sat in the sarcophagus and put the square up against the side, took a flashlight, and no light came out the other side. That means the sides are perfectly flat to machinist tolerances.
Man.
How'd they do that?
How'd they do that?
How they do that. And then, when the side of the sarcophagus comes down, when it meets the floor, it has a perfect 7/16 inch radius all the way around. That takes machining tools to do that. That's not a chisel.
How in the world did they do it? In spite of the movies that you saw.
This is a close-up of what's inside the pyramid. And I might want to add, Perry, that what we're going to talk about is out there. However, if it looks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, if it walks like a duck, it probably is. Yeah. And there has been numerous articles and books written on this subject from a technical advantage that they say, if you don't believe what I'm telling you, then can you tell me why they did what they did? And there is not an answer from
how they did it.
There's not an answer from their side. Okay. What we're looking at, Perry, on the screen, and for those that are listening, the device that's inside the pyramid, which if you're ever in Egypt, you can walk inside the pyramid and look at this.
Okay, this is the king's chamber.
This is what's called the king's chamber.
Okay.
And the grand gallery, which comes up from the right, comes up at a 45-degree angle, then levels off, and it goes through 3 or 4 large stones that are adjustable from outside the pyramid. You can raise or lower them. You then walk into what's called the king's chamber. Now, the pyramid is made out of limestone. Now, there's capstones on the outside, which are granite, and that was to give it resistance against the weather stuff, but inside's the cheapy stuff.
Okay.
Except for the king's chamber. If we can go back to the graphic, the entire king's chamber is made out of pink granite, which was shipped from Aswan, 500 miles away. First question comes up, why did they make all of that out of pink granite?
Yeah.
And I'll get to that in just a minute.
All right.
So above the king's chamber, you have this column that runs up inside the pyramid, and what you have are beams that weigh 70 tons each, and there's 43 of them stacked on top of each other with a gap in between. Each beam is perfectly tuned to the F-sharp chord, 438 cycles. They know that because NASA has taken a sound generator inside the king's chamber, and when they go up to the frequency spectrum, the beams will start to vibrate when they hit F-sharp.
Wow.
Now, why is that noteworthy? The frequency of the Earth is F-sharp chord, 438 cycles. Everything has a frequency, and you're probably familiar with, if you were in the military, when I was in the Air Force, we were taught that we marched across the bridge, everybody was to march out of step. Because if anything reaches its natural frequency, its harmonic frequency, whatever that is, it will start to vibrate. Mm-hmm. And they don't want a bridge to vibrate. The bridge in Tacoma is a classic example. What happened when the winds blew and that bridge started to vibrate?
Yeah.
It came down. It came down. So if we go back to the graphic, so you have these beams that are, and they're also supported so they can vibrate. And then at the top of that, you have a roof on top of that, also of pink granite at a 45-degree angle. The entire, when I had that drawn, it was not drawn quite accurately enough. The king's chamber, the walls and the floor are all suspended inside the pyramid. And if you can imagine the floor being sitting on what would look like an egg crate, in other words, undulating, and sits on it. So the entire assembly inside the pyramid, in reality, is separate from the pyramid, from the limestone blocks.
So it's just kind of floating in there.
It's floating in there, and it's all made out of pink granite. Now, why is pink granite noteworthy?
Well, is it conducive to the frequency?
Because it's high in crystalline quartz. Pink granite has over 55% crystalline quartz. And crystalline quartz, it's called a piezoelectric effect. If I can have the guys bring up figure 6. And crystalline quartz is a very interesting a material that crystalline quartz, if you can mechanically vibrate it or squeeze it, it will turn your vibrations into electrical energy. Are you starting to see where we're going with this?
Yeah.
Okay.
The light's coming on.
The light's coming on.
Literally.
People that are watching and listening to this are going, you got to be kidding me, because the Penguin World Atlas of Ancient Civilizations says, and I quote, we're talking 2500 BC here.
Yeah.
Okay. And what they say, and I'm quoting, is that the ancient Egyptian culture was nothing more than a farming community that did not have the advantage of pulleys or a wheel.
Yeah.
That's a quote.
Really?
Yes.
And look at that.
And now we're looking at this.
Yeah.
So if we can go back to the graphic on figure 5, please.
All right.
On figure 5.
Yeah.
This is what they think they were doing. That if this device inside the pyramid is tuned to the F-sharp chord, that, and I'm simplifying, that they feel that they had what they would call magnifiers or Helmholtz generators in the Grand Gallery, and that's that 45-degree channel you see coming up from the right. What that would do, as the pyramid was tuned to the Earth's frequency, it would start to vibrate. The vibrations coming up the Grand Gallery would be magnified, and as it went through those 4 stones that could be raised or lowered, they could tune the harmonic frequencies out and just have a pure F-sharp chord going into the king's chamber. No, I'll get to that in just a second.
All right.
So, as the waves would have come into the king's chamber, they would have come into the sarcophagus, which is also pink granite, correct?
Yeah.
They would be directed vertically up through the beams, which would start to vibrate. And the waves would then go up through the channel to the roof, which is at a 45-degree angle, and then be directed back down through into the king's chamber. And then those 2 little teeny passageways that you see going out of the king's chamber was how they got the electromechanical energy out of the king's chamber.
Wow.
I'm leaving out some details, but that's basically what they were doing.
All right, let's go back to the very first figure, if the guys in the room can bring it up, where you have multiple pyramids.
Okay,
And-
that was figure 2.
Okay, and I think what's interesting about that, because I asked you the question during the break, is there any correlation as to where they sit, and do they have some kind of function among themselves?
What we've been talking about so far is highly debatable.
Okay.
Although, and people are listening this morning, if they're very, very interested in this subject, Christopher Dunn has written a very, very good book called The Giza Power Plant.
Okay.
It's a fabulous book, and you're showing that on the TV screen now. You can get that in Barnes & Noble. If you read that book, you'll be hard-pressed not to believe what this pyramid was used for, because he presents all the scientific study that's been done on it, and how all the ducks, I'm going to say how all the ducks line up in a row.
All right.
It's fascinating. But he also, in the book, he forwards the idea that it's possible that the small pyramids around the large pyramid were used as a smaller device to excite the vibrations inside the larger pyramid to get it going, so to speak, like a donkey engine and a caterpillar tractor.
Oh, okay.
You have the big engine, then they start the small engine, and then they engage it, and then they get the big engine going. And then the stones that were movable up and down vertically inside the pyramid that were adjustable from outside could be used to fine-tune the frequencies coming into the pyramid exactly. In other words, filter out the subharmonics, because you only want the F-sharp chord.
Now, it's fascinating, to say the least. All this
Okay.
is just mind-blowing, but it makes sense.
Okay.
But you got to go back prior to, so this, let me back up. This then shows that they were producing power.
Yes.
That they were producing power. Now, how they harnessed that and used it is another
we don't know, because it's some type of a microwave energy.
Right.
And what they were doing with it, we don't know. But if you look at it from their perspective, when I say you compare their culture with our culture today, here we have huge machines, we have huge coal-burning plants, we have all this stuff. If they had that pyramid, this is if they had that pyramid sitting there that was capable of generating some type of a microwave energy, it was perfectly clean. Mm-hmm. It was perfectly green, if you want to use that term, right? And it was free. Therefore, you would have had no large plants, machinery, and all the associated stuff that we have today left over. The only thing you'd have had left over was a pyramid of blocks 500 feet high, and that's still what's sitting there today.
Okay, now, part of this question is, I mean, that's the function of the pyramid. We really haven't, and don't have time now to answer, how in the world did they cut those stones and move them, and how did they get that pink stone 500 miles away in one piece?
It weighed 70 tons. They did 43 of them.
And how did they cut those and move them?
Why don't we tackle that next month?
Okay, because they're perfectly fit together. What's this doing to the academic and the science community?
When we did this 5 years ago, it was totally not even discussed. But now it's being discussed because History Channel and Nat Geo realizes there's money to it, so they're willing to step up the plate. You can go to History Channel and get their DVD series, Ancient Aliens, is how they describe this.
Right.
This technology came from aliens that came here, dropped it here, and then they left again. That's the only way. If you're going to discount...
this kicked God out from the very beginning.
If you're going to discount the Bible, Perry, that's the only way you can do it. And that's exactly what they're doing. Next month, how about if I answer the question that you're talking about? I'm also going to talk about Gattenbrink's door, which is a discovery they made probably within the last 7 or 8 months, which are doors inside the pyramid in some of these little channels that have copper electrodes in them. Now, why would you have 2 copper electrodes inside of a little door in a channel that goes outside the pyramid?
All right, there's a picture there.
And that's the picture right there.
Is that like a great big plug in the wall? So you just
well,
plug it in?
it's only about, that channel is only about 8 inches square, but that's called Gattenbrink's door.
All right, we're going to give John's personal book away. He's authored this book.
Yep.
It's a workbook called Evolution or Creation.
And it's color, by the way.
It's all got a lot of stuff in here that you're going to enjoy it. Anyway, 776-5368, caller number 10 will receive a copy of this book. 776-5368. John, you're fascinating. Can't wait to get you back. And this book here is the Giza Power Plant. There's a picture of it there. You can check that out at Barnes & Noble.
Pyramids of Egypt, Part 1. The idea that civilizations progress from a primitive state to a more advanced one is a fallacy that evolutionists try to apply to history. If one abandons evolutionist nonsense and prejudice and looks at the historical references and findings with an unbiased mind, what one encounters is civilizations that used highly advanced technologies. Remains left from ancient Egypt, the Mayans, and the Sumerians indicate the branches of science such as electricity, electrochemistry, electromagnetics, metallurgy, hydrogeology, medicine, chemistry, and physics were used to a considerable extent. Electricity was efficiently generated and widely utilized in ancient Egypt. The Baghdad battery and the first arc lights were used at that time. But was electrical generation limited to these in ancient Egypt? A careful examination of Egyptian history immediately reveals the sophistication in perfect illumination. No soot has been found in the corridors of the pyramids or the tombs of the kings, because these areas were lit using electricity. Relief carvings show that the Egyptians used handheld torches powered by cable-free power sources. The arc lamp used in the lighthouse of Alexandria is further proof that electricity was used in ancient Egypt. The energy required to power the lighthouse of Alexandria for 24 hours a day could only have been supplied by a regular electrical source. The pyramids of Egypt were giant power plants generating electricity. 1. The outer casing of the Great Pyramid was covered with white tufa limestone, so tightly built that not even a razor blade could fit between the blocks. The white tufa limestone does not contain magnesium and has high insulating properties. This insulation property prevented the electricity inside the pyramid from being released without control. 2. The stone blocks used inside the pyramid were made of another form of limestone, containing crystal and a small amount of metal, which allow for maximum power transmission. The shafts inside the pyramid were lined with granite. Granite as a conductor is a slightly radioactive substance and permits the ionization of the air inside these shafts. When we look at an insulated electric cable, we see that conductive and insulation materials are used in the same way as in the pyramids. 3. The conductive and insulating properties of the pyramid are an example of flawless engineering. However, a source of energy is needed for electricity generation. The Giza Plateau where the pyramids stand is full of underground water channels. The pyramids rise above the limestone layers, the spaces between them being full of water. These special layers of rock that transmit electricity upward as they carry underground water to the surface are known as aquifers. The high volume flow of the River Nile that passes through these aquifers produces an electric current. This is known as physioelectricity. The pyramids' underground chambers are granite conductors built within the rock charged with physioelectricity. This electric current is conducted directly to the upper part of the pyramid's granite, covered subterranean chambers. Granite is a very good conductor of electricity. The electromagnetic field that forms at the bottom of the pyramid is transmitted in concentrated form to the upper layers of the pyramid. On the top of the pyramid there was a gold capstone, gold being an excellent conductor of electricity. This section is no longer there in our day. This means the top of the pyramid has lost its structure of flawless geometry. This gold capstone facilitated a conductive path for the transfer of negative ions to the ionosphere. This way, a current was generated. How does it serve to move the electromagnetic field on the ground through the help of an aquifer? An identical form of this technology, employed in Egypt 5,000 years ago, was used by Nikola Tesla, an inventor of electric technology in the early 1900s, in a tower he constructed in the United States of America. Tesla, the inventor of such fundamental electric technology as the alternating current, electric engine, radio, the laser, and radar, was successful in simultaneously transmitting sound and pictures between continents in the Wardenclyffe Tower he built between 1901 and 1917. He used an external source of electricity for this, and even applied wireless power transmission technology. Tesla had also built his tower above an aquifer and discharged the negative ions from the aquifer to the tower. The electromagnetic technology used in Tesla's famous tower is identical to the electromagnetic field set up in the construction of the pyramids. Both systems generate negative ions and transmit them without the need for electric cables. So for what purpose did the Egyptians use electricity? Relief carvings clearly show that the Egyptians used handheld bulb-type lamps powered by a cable-free electric source. These bulbs are reminiscent of Nikola Tesla's descriptions to show that his alternating current was safe. Alternating electric current through his body to light a bulb he held in his hand without using electric cables. This relief carving shows a wireless antenna. The Egyptians used the antenna and cable-free energy for wireless communication. In the relief on the left is a carved transmitter with a receiver on the left. This evidence indicates that the Egyptians used free wireless energy for communication purposes. This relief carving shows a yarn manufacturing facility. The yarn Egyptians used for their fabrics at that time were as fine as those manufactured by machinery today. The Egyptians also used electric power in their weaving plants. It was seen that many gold objects which have remained from ancient Egypt were in fact very finely gold-plated. Such perfect gold plating as in these pieces requires the use of electricity. The total electromagnetic measurement made around the Great Pyramid is identical to that made during a thunderstorm with lightning. There's a powerful electromagnetic field around the Great Pyramid. This may be observed through a simple experiment when standing at the top of the pyramid with a bottle wrapped in a damp cloth. Sparks fly away from the bottle as if one were on top of a high-voltage bobbin. The pyramids were not used as tombs. The pyramids have always been interpreted as the tombs of the pharaohs, but in fact, no inscriptions of any kind appear in the corridors of the Great Pyramid. This suggests a functional building rather than a mausoleum. An empty stone chest was found on the central axis of the pyramid that archaeologists call the King's Chamber. They claimed that this contained the coffin of the pharaoh, but that, since this had been stolen, it was now empty. But the examination of the dimensions of the stone chest and the special location in which it was installed reveals a different state of affairs. That point is just where the missing part of the pyramid's conductive structure and whole design suggest it should be. If a superconductive material was installed here, the pyramid could manufacture enough electricity for all of Egypt. This superconductor is thought to have been the Ark of the Covenant, which was known to have been in Egypt in ancient times, and whose dimensions are just right to fit inside the stone chest. The prophet Moses, peace be upon him, was adopted by Pharaoh, and according to historic records, was raised as an administrator because of his superior moral values, intelligence, and abilities. One of the phases in leadership training in ancient Egypt was the teaching of all the secrets of Egypt and the knowledge of energy. In addition to its other properties, there are also various references to the Ark of the Covenant serving as a capacitor, and that this was the source of Egypt's energy. The prophet Moses, peace be upon him, is known to have taken the Ark of the Covenant with him when he fled Egypt. According to historic references, one of the reasons why Pharaoh chased the prophet Moses, peace be upon him, right up to the last moment, and strove to catch him at whatever price, was the Ark of the Covenant, because Pharaoh was aware that all the glory and magnificence of Egypt would be lost without electricity. Historic references also show that Egyptian civilization reached its peak during the reign of Ramses II, who lived at the same time as the prophet Moses, peace be upon him. But those civilizations collapsed in less than 10 years after Ramses II, and Giza was even abandoned. The city, once the center of civilization, remained deserted until the next dynasty settled there. Were the Egyptians the only society to utilize wireless electrical technology? The relief carvings left by the Mayan and Assyrians also contain images of similar techniques to those implied in the pyramids. All this information once again goes to demonstrate that there were no primitive people and societies in the past, as evolutionists would have us believe. In terms of civilization, more or less developed communities have lived side by side at all times throughout history. A society that existed thousands of years ago enjoyed a far more advanced technology compared to one living in the 20th century. And this shows us that development is not part of an evolutionary process. In other words, that there is no linear advancement from a primitive level of civilization to a more developed one in history.
that it likes the best. So I've just walked through. So we're inside the first of the main chambers of the Red Pyramid, and it is tuned to A. That seems to be the sound that it likes the best. So I've just walked.